people of Zion shall say, no, you will not come and rape us as you have in the past. Babylon, you will not exist in our schools and in our legal system. The Babylonian spirit shall be brought to nothing, and Jezebel herself shall be down on her knees, says the Lord. Jezebel herself shall be down on her knees, says the Holy One. And Jezebel herself shall be down on her knees, says the Spirit of the living God. For I have tolerated enough. And now God says, allow me to give you a 4-year period of an extension of grace. An economy of grace has existed. But now God says there is going to be an overabundance of grace that's going to be granted to your children and to your children's children. Watch and see, says the Lord. I'll take them out of darkness, put light into them, and send them back to darkness. And they will go as the lunatic that was delivered by Jesus. And Jesus told him to go back. He was the first one that was set aside as a missionary in that place. God says, I'm raising up a whole troop of missionaries out of your children. I'm raising up missionaries. They're going to go into the culture, and they're going to take Babylon and say, you submit to us. We don't submit to you. The Daniels of this hour shall look at the King Nebuchadnezzar's and the King Darius's, and they shall say, no, we will prove to you that our God is the only God. Watch me, says the Lord, as I take the atheists and the agnostics and prove myself, because the angel that has come to reveal the mystery, as in Revelation 10, it has been spoken, says the Lord, that there is an angel that says, we have blown the trumpet, the final trumpet. Now, the mystery that was spoken by the prophets of old shall be opened up for this generation to hear the secrets of God and take the kingdom by force, says the Lord. Come on. Hallelujah. Lift your hands and praise Him. Hallelujah. Says the Lord. No, you didn't hear me. Trump shall become a trumpet. Are you listening to me? I will raise up the trump to become a trumpet, and Bill Gates to open up the gate of a financial realm for the church, says the Spirit of the living God. Come on!
Before the 2016 presidential election, some evangelical Christians began comparing Donald Trump to King Cyrus, the biblical king who's credited with allowing Jews to return to Jerusalem from exile in the Babylonian Empire. The idea behind the comparison is that a non-believing leader can be used by God to enact policies that help advance the interest of believers, in this case, Christians and Jews.
We are very happy to announce that the Mikdash Educational Center just produced a new Cyrus Trump temple coin. This special coin was produced and minted for the 70 years of the independence of the State of Israel, and to honor and praise President Donald Trump, who promised, but not only promised, also fulfilled this promise, and next week will move the American embassy to Jerusalem. President Trump is starting a prophetic process by moving the American embassy to Jerusalem. Just like King Cyrus 2,500 years ago said, he charged me to build a house in Jerusalem. Here again, President Trump is building a house in Jerusalem.
Okay, let's talk history and see where the basis of human rights originated from. Up until around 539 BC, human rights had no meaning, and the world only knew savagery and slavery. Until a new kind of ruler appeared in Persia called Cyrus the Great. Cyrus believed that it is better to be loved than feared, and so he respected people of all kinds, even those he conquered. So many joined the Persian Empire without a fight, like the people of Babylon. There he freed the slaves, many of whom were Jewish, and helped them return to their homeland to rebuild their temples and to practice their religion. 2,500 years ago, Cyrus made a historic proclamation of his views and laws on a clay cylinder known as the Cyrus cylinder, which became known as the first declaration of human rights, religious tolerance, and individual freedom. Around 370 BC, Xenophon, a student of Socrates, wrote the book Cyropedia, an account of what made Cyrus an ideal ruler. Through this book, Cyrus's humanitarian ideals spread and influenced intellectuals all over the world, including the founding fathers of America, who owned multiple copies of the Cyropedia and who centered the U.S. Constitution on the same ideals of religious and individual freedom originated by Cyrus. In 1886, over 100,000 people, led by the French, helped create the Statue of Liberty, a symbolic gift that recognized America as the leading light for these ideals and of freedom around the world. And since 1971, a replica of the Cyrus cylinder sits in the halls of the United Nations as a reminder of the importance of these same ideals to all humanity. In 2013, Farhang Foundation, a non-profit, non-religious, non-political cultural organization, partnered with the Getty Museum and other cultural organizations to bring the Cyrus cylinder from the British Museum to Los Angeles, where it became the most visited exhibition in the museum's history. On the strength of this reception, Farhang decided to commission a permanent landmark called Freedom, a Shared Dream, to celebrate the shared humanitarian and multicultural ideals that originated from Cyrus, the great king of Persia, and inspired the founding fathers of America. Once built, this monument to freedom and coexistence will be officially gifted to stand in the heart of the city of Los Angeles as a permanent reminder of our shared humanity. Farhang's goal is to inspire over 100,000 people to support the creation of this monument. So we become just the second example in history where this many people got together to create and gift a monumental symbol to freedom as a shared cultural value. Imagine that. Then add your support.
All right.
Hello, I'm Jeffrey Mishlove, and I'm with Jason Reza Georgiani. This is a special program that I've decided to make in Jason's behalf because from my perspective, he has been libeled seriously, probably the worst example of dishonest, malicious libel that I have ever seen in my life. And I'm a person who has been through and prevailed in a defamation suit, so I know what it's like, and I feel very, very strongly that this brilliant young scholar is a good person, is an honest person, and deserves a very clear defense.
Georgiani is the architect of the alt-right corporation, the largest propaganda machine of the alt-right. He has also been linked to some of the most influential political figures in the United States. So the scary thing about the alt-right corp and Jason Georgiani is that they're building a media empire.
So, in light of the outcome of the recent election, in which I think the rise of the alt-right was the decisive factor, our authors offer constructive criticism of the ill-conceived and bankrupt socio-political ideologies of liberalism, democracy, and universal human rights. Universal human rights. Universal human rights.
Hi. Nice to meet you. Nice to see you. I just ordered myself a Coke. Do you want something? I saw you at London Forum in February.
Yeah, this movement has mass appeal because it is the counterculture now. It is the underdog. We are the anti-establishment. Ironically, we should go from being underdogs to becoming a revolutionary state. That's all the difference in the world.
Yeah, right. I mean, problematic, but they just become part of.
Yeah, I mean, I hate to use this analogy, but frankly, like, it's not as if the Communist Party in Russia went from being underdogs to being mainstream. No, they created a revolutionary state, right? I mean, that's what we need to do.
Yeah.
Now, you mentioned Richard Spencer also, and I have to say, Jason, when I first learned that you were in the same room with Richard Spencer, I was horrified. I didn't understand what a person like you would be doing in the room with him to begin with at the NPI conference, I think in January of this year, 2017.
Well, you know, there's been a mainstream media caricature produced of Richard over the last year or so. And a lot of it is largely his fault. But when I met Richard in November of 2016, Richard was not at all committed to a white nationalist or
ethno-nationalist ideology. In fact, Richard used to claim that he was a globalist. And I confronted him on a number of occasions about how globalism would in any way be consistent with white ethnic separatism or white ethno-nationalism. And he seemed amenable to dumping white nationalist ideology and making it clear that it wasn't his own, if we were to be able to get backing for more global vision for the alt-right. And so it's only after the funding that we were promised as startup capital for the alt-right corporation did not materialize that Richard began to repeatedly reaffirm the mainstream media's caricaturization of him as a white nationalist leader.
Right, let's move along here. Otherwise, we'll never get through, Jason. Cyrus, tell us about Cyrus the Great.
Yeah, so Cyrus the Great is the founder of the Persian Empire, and Cyrus also highlights the connection between the Persians and the Medes, or in today's terminology, the Persians and the Kurds. Cyrus's mother was a Mede, or Kurd. And he basically, to make a long story short, led a revolt against the Median kingdom. The Medes had a kingdom for about 600 years before the Persians, and the Persians were more nomadic, pastoral people. At the time of Cyrus, and led by Cyrus, they wind up taking over the Median kingdom, and then due to his extraordinary statesmanship and competence as a military leader, dramatically expanding this kingdom into a vast empire that incorporated many other peoples. Cyrus was considered by Greek authors contemporary to him and in the generation after him as the ideal statesman. Xenophon wrote a book called Cyropedia, or The Education of Cyrus, which holds up Cyrus the Great as the ideal statesman. And this has to do in large part with his extraordinary humanitarianism. He's the first guy who did not pursue a punitive policy toward conquered enemies. He would never plunder an enemy territory. There were never any mass executions. In fact, generally speaking, whenever Cyrus would conquer a rival kingdom, he would improve the living conditions of the subjugated population.
It's called One Belt, One Road, or for short, OBOR.
China states that the Belt and Road Initiative is a systematic project which should be built upon the principle of extensive consultation, joint contribution, and shared benefits.
He would improve the living conditions of the subjugated population.
The belt connects the land, the road moves on the sea. The promise that they hold is joint prosperity.
He would improve the living conditions of the subjugated population.
The lines in our cables, diplomacy tables, sharing a world of prosperity. Oh! The future's coming now. The belt and road is how.
The Belt and Road is how? As in the Chinese word for good? Oh. Congratulations to Chinese state-run media for really upping their propaganda game. But maybe you're still not clear what One Belt, One Road actually is. Maybe one of the other children's videos by Chinese state-run media can explain.
Once upon a time, several routes led from China through Central Asia to Europe. It was called Silk Road. A few years ago, China's President Xi Jinping proposed making new routes like the old routes, but even bigger.
He would improve the living conditions of the subjugated population.
That's pretty much the gist of it. It's the biggest global economic investment project in modern times, bigger even than Newt Gingrich's proposed moon colony. Yeah, remember when that was the weirdest thing that happened in a presidential election? Anyway, this global economic investment project involves more than 60 countries and $1 trillion, which is more than the combined GDP of the smallest 97 nations, or the price of 28 moon colonies. And the whole thing is being led by the benevolent leadership of the Chinese Communist Party. It's called One Belt, One Road, or for short, OBOR.
There were never any mass executions. In fact, generally speaking, whenever Cyrus would conquer a rival kingdom, he would improve the living conditions of the subjugated population. So it got to the point where, in some cases, when people heard that Cyrus was on his way, the military would just lay down their arms because they were chafing under some unjust tyrant, and they knew that Cyrus was going to come and improve living conditions for them. He, even in several cases, spared the lives of kings that he conquered and turned them into his close advisors. This was the case with Croesus of Lydia, for example. So Cyrus is the point of origin for this Persian tradition of humanitarianism that's often conflated these days with human rights. People describe the founding charter of the Persian Empire, the Cyrus Cylinder, as the first charter of human rights. But there are serious conceptual problems with the modern European Enlightenment notion of human rights that don't really apply to the humanitarianism of Cyrus, which is rooted in Zarathustra's ethos and worldview. Our authors offer constructive criticism of the ill-conceived and bankrupt socio-political ideologies of liberalism, democracy, and universal human rights.
Human rights is, geez, that's a good question.
Human rights. Oh, that's a tough one. Wow. I don't even know how to give that a definition.
I would probably have to do a little bit of homework or something. Any right that I think just as a normal, human,
The rights that humans have?
Oh, that's a very large debate.
Tú le puedes preguntar a 20 personas y te van a dar 20 diferentes opiniones.
Non saprei, una domanda complicatissima.
Yes, we just take them for granted that they're there, but we don't even consider what they are.
Human rights are the rights you have simply because you're human. It's how you instinctively expect and deserve to be treated as a person, like the right to live freely, to speak your mind, and to be treated as an equal. There are many kinds of rights. Most apply to a certain group. But human rights are the only ones that apply to absolutely everyone, everywhere. That means kids, old people, poor people, basketball players, garbage men, rappers, teachers, Africans, Indians, Albanians, Christians, Muslims, Kabbalists, atheists, your mom, your dad, your next door neighbor, and you all have the exact same human rights. In other words, they're universal. But the question remains, what are they?
Name the human rights?
What the human rights are?
The right to live.
Equality between all peoples.
Right to religion, the right to...
Is there supposed to be a list somewhere I should be aware of?
According to the United Nations, there are a total of 30 human rights, which are usually lumped together and called simply human rights. They're all listed out in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which is the world's most widely accepted document on the subject. But it was a long time in coming. At first, there were no human rights. If you were in with the right crowd, you were safe. If you weren't, well, you weren't. But then a guy named Cyrus the Great decided to change all that. After conquering Babylon, he did something completely revolutionary. He announced that all slaves were free to go. He also said people had the freedom to choose their religion, no matter what crowd they were a part of. They documented his words on a clay tablet known as the Cyrus Cylinder. And just like that, human rights were born.
So Cyrus is the point of origin for this Persian tradition of humanitarianism that's often conflated these days with human rights. People describe the founding charter of the Persian Empire, the Cyrus Cylinder, as the first charter of human rights. But there are serious conceptual problems with the modern European Enlightenment notion of human rights that don't really apply to the humanitarianism of Cyrus, which is rooted in Zarathustra's ethos and worldview.
There's a demand for improvement. There's a pressure on you as a human being to become more or to, as you said before, separate yourself from the animal kingdom and actually use your logic and your rationality, your wisdom, and these kinds of things. today, none of this is incorporated into this issue of human rights. You're just to be given things. There's no obligations put on you as a human within the civilization, within the society, to better yourself.
We have gone too far in our concern for individual rights unmatched with individual responsibilities. We have too many people who want to take and not give. We have too much of a good thing, too much individualism. And what we need now is balance that, this concern for neighborhoods, for family, above all for the moral order.
So this is definitely something from the ancient world that we've lost, or this is something we have given up on today, unfortunately.
That's right. I mean, in the modern conception of universal human rights, there's this unqualified right to freedom of religion. Well, suppose that a large group of people believe in a religion that's fundamentally anti-humanitarian. Suppose a large group believe in an inhuman religion, right? I mean, how is that a coherent political ideology? Whereas Cyrus and the ancient Persian emperors that followed him, like Darius and Xerxes, they saw a well-governed empire as a walled garden. And in a walled garden, or a walled, agricultural area, you can have many different flowers or crops growing together. But you need to weed the garden, weed the garden, weed the garden, and you need to keep pests out.
Here's the way they look at it. Here's their metaphor for the end of innocence. Adam and Eve were held prisoner in the Garden of Eden.
Weed the garden.
By an unjust, cruel, and vindictive God. Until Lucifer, through his agent Satan, set man free from this garden by giving him the gift of intellect. Through the use of intellect, man will conquer the earth, will conquer nature, and will himself become God. It's taught in every Masonic temple in this land, every secret brotherhood, every secret society, every mystical temple, every occult organization teaches the Luciferian philosophy. They do not believe in Lucifer
because they only believe in science.
They do not believe in any entity called a devil, and they do not believe in God.
I don't believe in God. I believe in science.
It is a mistake for you to assume that they do. They're atheists in the strictest sense of the word. They are humanists.
What is humanism? It is a philosophy and a life stance. Humanists assert that humans must be responsible for making their own lives better. It is about creating a kinder, gentler society through the spirit of compassion, reason, and critical thinking. As humanists, we do not rely on gods or angels for help. We take it upon ourselves to make the world a better place. All people are born with the capacity to do good. Our empathy, our compassion, and our selflessness has emerged within us over millions of years through the process of evolution.
Because I only believe in science.
This capacity to love has made us stronger, not weaker. It has helped us form stronger communities and brought us happiness and courage in our darkest hours. However, most of us do not realize this. We often attribute our good qualities to religious, political, or racial labels. This is divisive and unnecessary. As humans, all of us are capable of doing good just for goodness sake. The world's most pressing problems should be solved through human thinking and action, instead of hoping for divine intervention. Science and free inquiry should be applied to issues such as global warming, diseases, violent conflicts, and poverty. Humanism recognizes that reliable knowledge arises through a continuing process of observation, evaluation, and revision. As humanists, we seek to understand the world first and make decisions based on what is real, not what is imagined or fixed by archaic tradition. This is the most effective way to reduce suffering.
You don't get to admit to your own suffering. If you can't admit to your own suffering, then you certainly... See, the suffering, especially the additional suffering, the excess suffering, should be treated as evidence that you're not doing something quite right yet. It should be treated as evidence that you're wrong. There's something important that you're doing that's wrong. I understand how harsh that is. And I'm not saying that everyone who's suffering is suffering because they're doing something in some simple way that's wrong. I was in an elevator once in a hospital. It was a very terrifying thing. And this person got on who was just in an absolute state of shock. You know, I mean, it was really not good. And I don't remember how this happened, but I engaged the person in conversation, and they just said that they had just been diagnosed with what looked to be terminal cancer. And what was horrifying about it was that what they were doing was going over their life in the elevator, trying to figure out what they had done in order to deserve such a fate. You know, they'd immediately taken it on themselves as a moral failing. And that's not what I'm saying. You can't come up to someone who has cancer and say, well, if you weren't such a bloody idiot throughout your whole life, you wouldn't have cancer. And believe me, that happens a lot more than you think. And people who have diseases like that get blamed for it. That's not what I'm saying. It's not like that. It's a more generalized attitude. That is that if life isn't yet what it should be, then you have a primary responsibility to do something about it. And the place to start looking is to your own errors and to fix them. And that's a safe bet, man, because you're probably doing some things that you wouldn't have to be doing that if you fixed would make things better. So it's time to let go and to sacrifice who you are for who you could become.
The me needs a we to be. And what we're trying to say like this is that social science data from experiments psychologists conducted, from studies of prisons to a study of high-rise buildings in Manhattan, all find that when people are isolated, when they're cut off from each other, either because they've been put in isolation in prison or they're senior citizens in an apartment in Manhattan in which they don't know people down the corridor, suffer a large variety of inflictions, many of them psychological, some of them is even physiological. So it seems that the essence of human nature is not that free-standing, isolated individual, which is often so cherished in American history and ideology, but it's somebody who thrives because in a lasting, meaningful relationship with others.
The ends should not always justify the means. We assert that nobody should be punished or discriminated against for what they believe. We feel that people's right to believe should be respected. However, ideas and beliefs must be discussed and debated. They should never be beyond criticism. Good ideas will withstand criticism, while bad ideas, if unquestioned, will end up causing harm for the world. Humanism affirms the importance of literature, music, and the arts for personal development and fulfillment. It values artistic creativity and imagination, recognizing the transforming power of art. In short, as humanists, we strive to be happy, to be reasonable, and to lead fulfilling lives.
That's their religion. At the highest level, their goal is to create a world in which the adepts, the 1,000 points of light, working behind the veil to create the culmination of the great plan, can realize the ultimate happiness for mankind.
I've spoken of 1,000 points of light, of all the community organizations that are spread like stars throughout the nation doing good. We will work hand in hand, encouraging, sometimes leading, sometimes being led, rewarding. We will work on this in the White House, in the cabinet agencies. I will go to the people and the programs that are the brighter points of light, and I'll ask every member of my government to become involved. The old ideas are new again because they're not old. They are timeless. Duty, sacrifice, commitment, and a patriotism that finds its expression in taking part and pitching in.
That's why they don't oppose pornography. That's why they don't oppose certain crimes. That's why they say you should not be put in jail for the rest of your life for murder or anything else. There should be no death penalty, because it was a learning experience. And having gone through that learning experience, you're a better person now. This is what they teach. They believe punishment for these crimes is nothing more than vengeful retribution, which is wrong in their eyes. So these are really the two philosophies that we have competing with each other in the world today.
This was the ancient Persian imperial philosophy that goes back to Kshatravarya in Zarathustra's thought, or Shahrivar. So, you know, if you can have many different ethnicities, people of many different religions living within the same imperial realm, but there are going to be people and doctrines that cannot coexist with others, and so you have to keep them out. Otherwise, you're going to be compromising the stability of the entire system. You're going to be introducing something that's going to you know, basically destroy all of the crops that are growing within this garden.
We tend to think about the nation as a lot of individuals, but in effect there are important communities, ethnic communities, racial communities, and in the past there was an idea that they should all melt away their heritages and all become unhyphened Americans. We don't think that's necessary. I think it's perfectly right for Irish, Polish, whatever Americans to keep their dances, their cuisines. In fact, it enriches the country, as long as they accept that there's a certain bond we all share. And that's our slogan is pluralism within unity. Now, what are these values we all need to agree on? Is first of all the democratic form of government, the Bill of Rights, and mutual tolerance. Don't ask what your country or your society or your community should do for you. Ask what you can do for the future we all share.
And this garden concept was referred to as paridaesa in ancient Persian, which is where we get the word paradise from in English.
As the present order begins to disintegrate, will we be able to create a parallel and alternative structure? It's going to end with the expulsion of the majority of the migrants, including citizens who have Muslim descent, generally speaking. That's how it's going to end. It's going to end with concentration camps and expulsions and war at the cost of a few hundred million people. Put it this way, we will have a Europe in 2050 where the banknotes have Adolf Hitler, Napoleon Bonaparte, Alexander the Great. And Hitler will be seen like that, like Napoleon, like Alexander, not like some weird monster who's unique in his own category. No, he's just going to be seen as a great European leader. Now, like we say in English, you don't make an omelet without breaking a few eggs.
No.
How many eggs is Richard Spencer willing to break in the movement? There are people who always want to be French. They always want to be. They basically have a ghetto mentality. And they see this alt-right corporation, they're like, shit, this could actually take power.
Yeah.
That's scary. Let me tell you, I had contact with the Trump administration. This alt-right corporation was not just like I came up with some harebrained idea by myself, like, oh, I'm just going to... No. Was the alt-right would become like the policy group for the Trump administration.